On this Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, breakdown day has come and gone. Damichael Cole, my co-host, was there. He was paying attention. He was listening closely. We got a couple of episodes this week that we're going to break down everything we heard, everything Damichael saw. Ja thinks Memphis is ready for the championship contention window. Zach Kleiman stated the obvious of a big being needed. And GG Jackson once again shined, just on a different stage. We'll talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I got to tell you, that new open is just
gets me going.
Fire.
Gets the blood going. Fire. I like it.
I know there were some comments on YouTube that were a little bit iffy at first, but
we got some mixed opinions.
I tell you what, I'm jacked up after that. I know Damichael is, and I know you are as well, even if you're not as big of a fan of the new intro. I'm Joe Mullinax, that's Damichael Cole, and this is Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for making us your first listen today, and hopefully each and every day is an everydayer to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I have a competitive side, I admit it, and I'm also a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. Join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or on Google Play. Again, we're free and available wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Make us here at Locked On Grizzlies a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every day of the offseason. And it's still kind of bittersweet to say offseason, right, Damichael? This time last year, we were getting ready for playoff series, doing cross promotional shows with Locked On Lakers and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Not the case this time around. Again, Damichael and I will take a day or two off later on in the month. But thanks to Breakdown Day and thanks to, Adrian Wojnarowski tweeting out that garbage that is Team USA. We'll talk about that later this week. I think we got plenty to talk about for the remainder of the week, partner. And we will start our show today. And again, Damichael Cole is my wonderful co-host of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, award-winning Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. Damichael was in the room where Breakdown Day happened. He saw Zach Kleiman. He saw Taylor Jenkins. He saw Ja Morant, GG Jackson, Desmond Bane, everybody that spoke at Breakdown Day. Damichael was there. Check out all his work over at the Commercial Appeal about Breakdown Day and, of course, everything about the Grizzlies moving forward if you don't already do so. Damichael, before we get into what I thought was the main headline of the day, just your overall takeaways, thoughts, how it felt to be in there. We talked a little bit before we started recording the show, and the vibe in the room is always different, right, from year to year. Mm-hmm. The vibe was probably pretty noticeably different this time around because for the first time in this era of Grizzlies basketball, as we talked about on yesterday's show, they're not in the playoffs, right? The first time in the Taylor Jenkins, Ja Morant, Zach Kleiman era, there is no postseason basketball for the Memphis Grizzlies. And one of the overarching themes was that kind of sticks in their side a little bit. It's going to stick in their craw for a couple of months.
Oh, yeah. A lot of those guys kind of made reference to that fact. They're not used to the season kind of ending this soon, but it was more business-like. There wasn't a lot of joking around and things like that because, for one, it was the first time that we publicly spoke to a lot of those guys in a while. Ja Morant, first time we talked to him in a while. Desmond Bane, outside of a few appearances, haven't talked to him, much.
Because when you're on the injured list, you're not required by the NBA to talk to the media.
Exactly. So, first time, that's why I said first time publicly from a, media availability standpoint that we've been talking to those guys, first time they sat on the podium and all that. So, it was a little different because when they get there, it's like, oh, hey, how you been? And then you kind of get to business and whatnot. But very, very strategic. It's always good to, kind of catch up with Ja. That's the one guy who everyone wants to hear what he has to say, how he feels. He talked about his mental. He talked about, the AAU team. But as you alluded to earlier, he said that when the Grizzlies are whole next season, potentially, he said, God willing, that was his word. Because, at this point, that's how you feel, right? God willing, if this team is healthy, they can compete for a championship. And I don't think there should be any surprises that he said that. That should be the feeling in Memphis right now. This team feels like they can compete for a championship. Wish we would have got Marcus Smart because you love his perspective of that, but he was ill on yesterday, so we didn't get to talk to him. But love his perspective when they talk about championship contenders. Derrick Rose also had some really good comments on that side of things as well. But all in all, these guys are confident in what they can be. And here's another thing. The other guys, talking to them, everybody understands their role. Like, I would think there were like 3 different guys, Joe, that said noteworthy comments where it was like, he gets it. And I say that because you tell me, how many times do we see it, Joe, where a lot of players are out, and maybe not a lot of players, well, certain players are out and other guys step into more prominent roles. The first, an example that just popped in my head was Reggie Jackson in OKC. Ooh. When Russell Westbrook missed those games. And Reggie Jackson said, I should be a starter. And they had to trade him. So hearing Gigi Jackson say, hey, I got to work on my game because the stars are about to be back. Or hearing Vince Williams say, you know, when Dez and Ja and those guys are on the floor, they're going to have the ball in their hands. So I got to do some of the dirty work and play off of them. And then hearing Brandon Clark from a different perspective say, hey, I like it when we have a bigger big on the floor with Jaren and I come off the bench. That was noteworthy to me. That's 3 guys who could very well, after this season, say, Brandon Clark can say, man, I showed in those games I'm healthy and we got an opening starting spot alongside of Jaren, who I played well beside. I won't. He could have said that. Vince Williams could have said, hey, man, look at the numbers. I've been one of the few players when I've been on the floor, I've been a positive for the Grizzlies. When I played alongside of Ja and Dez for that small period stretch, I was a very plus player in that stretch. I think I deserve to start. Gigi Jackson could say, hey, maybe I don't deserve to start yet, but I should be in the conversation because I put up 44 in the last game. And what I put, everyone gets it. They get it right now.
Gigi Jackson isn't Kenneth Lofton Jr., so he's not going to say something like that. And in fairness, Kenneth Lofton Jr. didn't say that either. I will talk more about Gigi later in the show. I think you're exactly right about him. He was very impressive. Yeah. Wise beyond his years. And we'll talk more about Brandon Clark in particular on tomorrow's show, because that's one of the points that I caught on to that maybe wasn't a main headline coming out of the breakdown day. Yeah. But Ja saying that they're title capable definitely does stand out to me. And I wonder how much our audience agrees with that. Maybe let us know in the comments if you think this team's title window is now. I think he's right, but I think that there's still decisions that have to be made, like what to do with Luke.
A lot of questions.
That was a question, and we'll talk about Zach Kleiman here in a moment. Nobody really kind of pressed on what Kleiman said about Luke Kennard. I know that might have been a bit frustrating for the beat writer in you, but I noticed that, right? Like the Luke Kennard question is a significant question, and I'm one of Luke Kennard's biggest fans. But you can make an argument with his $14 million or so salary. That's also one of the easiest contracts to move on from with that team option. So that's one of the biggest inflection points of this offseason is what happens and becomes of Kennard. They could do a lot of different things between now and I think it's June 28th or June 29th. Something like that, which coincides almost exactly with the draft, give or take a few days. So lots of interesting things will be coming from Memphis. Do you agree with Ja's assessment? Do you think this team is title ready? Maybe not as is, because we've both acknowledged the need for a big in some way, right? You know, maybe you're not into Klingon. Maybe you think they do a mid-level exception or a trade, whatever the case might be. Yeah. Do you think outside of maybe a piece like that, even if it's not a starting big, are they title ready in your opinion?
I think they should feel that way. And what I mean by that is they may not be at the start of the season next season, but by the end of the season, they 100% should be, because you got the core, you know, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. But what you hate about this past season that we watched the most is we think that Marcus Smart can play well alongside of those guys. Like we saw it, 9 games of it. So and it
those were
good.
A great 9 games.
And it was 6-3. So you think like, hey, yeah, it looked good, but you didn't see it against the Clippers when you got to guard Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. You didn't see it against the Suns when you got to guard Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. You didn't even get to see it against OKC when you got to guard Shai Gilgeous and Jalen Williams. So it's like, that's when I want to see it. When you got to go against those multiple wings, you need Dez guarding one, Marcus guarding the other, and then Ja probably guarding the other backcourt player, whatever the case may be. But I don't think it was battle-tested enough for them to have the 100% certainty that this is the group that can win us the championship. But I feel like they should feel that way because in the previous 2 seasons, when Ja Morant and Desmond Bane and Jeremy on the floor, they won 50-plus games. They made a small change from Dillon Brooks to Marcus Smart, which I think we can say, based off even the small sample size that we saw, I think it's an upgrade. So even if it's a marginal one, it is an upgrade in my opinion. But even if it doesn't, if you go into the beginning of the season, you say, there's a couple moves that need to be made. Again, even with the center spot or whatever, make them at the deadline. Make them before the deadline. And you definitely should be competing for a championship next season.
The team as constructed right now, I think, is a top 3 seed and maybe top 4 seed in the Western Conference. And I mean literally right now, like if they did nothing, I do believe they're in that mix. Now, maybe that's Beale Street blue colored glasses, but yeah. I think that we get so focused on how strong the Western Conference is in terms of record.
Yeah,
I think we lose sight of Memphis not being there, right? And other teams, depending on who their schedule allotted for them to play, catching teams when they're down, second night of a back-to-back, that sort of thing. You actually look at the schedule of some of these teams, not to be a hater. People are going to call me a hater. I'm fascinated to see what the Thunder does in the first round of the playoffs because there's a very real chance they're going to be facing off against somebody like the Los Angeles Lakers, like the,
a battle-tested team.
Warriors. Mm-hmm. Like, what is the Thunder going to do when they stare down Steph Curry across from them and they got to deal with that guy who's done so much? It's going to be a fascinating watch. Again, not hating on the Thunder. Doesn't mean if they lose in the first round that they're an embarrassment. They're the youngest team to ever clinch the number 1 seed, for goodness sakes. But I think that people forget about Memphis, and I do think they're a top 4 to 5-ish team in the West, even if you believe in the strength of it. The Grizzlies, as they are pretty darn good, and that is an important piece of context to hold on to moving forward. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Zach Kleiman, Captain Obvious, we need a big. How are they going to address that? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all have things that we need to get off our chest sometimes. Maybe it's something big, a major change in your life. Maybe it's something small, like the fact that Zach Kleiman traded away a legitimate big and then all of a sudden decides that the team needs one. Maybe a cheaper one is a better way that he can't say the honest part, I suppose. But regardless of what you're frustrated about, whether it's big or small in your opinion, everything in your life, of course, matters to you, and therefore there are no little things. Therapy can be different for everyone and helpful for everyone if you allow for it to be. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, but it's important to still, again, if you have something bothering you, get it off your chest. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Go check out BetterHelp. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Zach Kleiman, Captain Obvious, Memphis needs a pig. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Damichael was there in the room where Breakdown Day happened. We will continue to talk about that, not just this episode, but tomorrow, maybe even in the Thursday show. It's the end of the season, so, you don't want to start draft content too early, partner. But at the same time, there were legitimately interesting things that were said by the Grizzlies, and they're worthy of a conversation between the two of us. And then, of course, our wonderful listeners and viewers in the comments at our various spots, YouTube, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, whatever the case might be. We talked about Ja thinking that the team is championship ready. Zach Kleiman made it very clear that he understands that the Memphis Grizzlies need a big. And during my BetterHelp ad read, I was being facetious. Steven Adams was traded almost solely for financial reasons, right? Trying to avoid that second apron, those sorts of things. You could have made the argument that it would make more sense to do that with Luke Kennard, but we've already had that conversation, you and I. They made the decision to move on from Adams, right? And we'll talk more about Luke tomorrow. With the need for a big, did you get any insight from him how they maybe were leaning towards doing it? With the financial concerns, I think if Memphis picks 7, which is unlikely, right? They're probably going to move up or down somewhere.
Right.
But if they pick in that range and say they take a Klingon, That's roughly $7.2 million, right? Give or take a tenth or so there in the lottery. That, in theory, is cost controlled over the next 4 years, whereas trying to make a trade for a major starting level big would probably involve moving on from a key piece like a Kennard, a Marcus Smart. Maybe you combine Zaire Williams and John Conchar, that sort of stuff. It would take a sizable move to the roster in order to bring in somebody like that. So did you get any inkling as to which way they were leaning? Again, this championship talk makes me think that maybe they're not super interested in having it be a rookie. But at the same time, if you start Jaren next to Clark, which, as you alluded to earlier, Clark wasn't super stoked about. We'll talk more about that tomorrow as well. If you do that and you have Donovan Clingan as your big for 20 minutes off the bench, that kind of checks that box in and of itself, right?
Yeah. I think what I gathered from it is they want a big. And by big, I think it's going to be someone who is primarily a center. I know with the comments that stuck with most people were the fact that Kleiman said that, the Grizzlies like Jaren at the 5. But I want to make sure that people didn't take those comments out of context, because if you listened, and in my case, I just gathered, just talking to Kleiman a bunch and being around.
Literally your job to listen.
Yeah, like it's basically him saying that they want to have the option of having Jaren at the 5. And Taylor Jenkins touched on this as well, because I asked Taylor Jenkins, what's the prototypical 5 in your opinion? And he basically said that there isn't one, simply because there will be certain, which I've said in the show, and I think you've alluded to as well, there will be certain matchups, as we've seen in the past, where you're playing, the Jokic's of the world, and you're going to need a Clingan type sized big. And then there are going to be matchups when Karl Anthony Towns, even though he's not at center anymore, but they're going to be similar matchups to that one when we saw the Grizzlies in the past have to start Brandon Clark and Xavier Tillman Sr. instead of a Steven Adams prototypical type big. And that's going to be the case going forward. When you play the Clippers, they like to go small. Well, put Jaren Jackson Jr. and Brandon Clark alongside each other. So I think the type of big is going to be one of those bigger, type of players. Now, the idea that Jaren could still start at the 5 is still relevant, even though with the Grizzlies potentially adding that type of player, because Zach Kleiman said that just because they're going to add a big does not mean it's going to be a starter. Does not mean that player is going to come off the bench. Does not mean he's going to be acquired in the draft via trade or through free agency. But what it means is it's more than likely going to be a rotation player. Not even more than likely, it's going to be a rotation player. It's going to be someone who the Grizzlies feel can impact the rotation. And quite frankly, I think that's all they need, because like Jenkins and Kleiman and, me and you have said in the past, there are going to be certain matchups where, you're going to get that big guy off the floor. He's having to guard Paul George or whatever the case may be, and he's getting cooked. Or he's having to guard Kevin Durant because Durant is at the 4 and he's getting cooked. And then there are going to be other matchups when you're going against Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. You're going to say, we got to get Brandon Clark out of the game. We got to get this guy out of the game. Put Clingan in there, or put Andre Drummond or whoever the big is. So you want to keep that optionality. It was good to hear him just come out. He said, we're not trying to hide our hand. It was good to see him come out and straight up say it. We know we need a big. We want a big, and we're going to get a big. So that's the case. And I think it's a statement in itself. And, it's what me and you've been beating that drum. And now we know the Grizzlies are going to be as assertive as we think they should be.
I think that if they draft a Donovan Clingan, if they trade back, right, there's been ideas floated around that, whether it's maybe Memphis moves up into the 1 or 2 pick, the Wizards fall. Denny Avdija has been a player that friends of ours, Sean Coleman, Parker Fleming,
Parker loves
talked
that guy.
a ton about that. But that's a pretty solid wing. And if you trade back to 5 or 6, and you could still get Clingan, right? Like right now, people saying that Clingan's going to be a top 3 pick. I think folks are basing a lot of that off of what he did in the NCAA tournament.
Medicals haven't come out yet. I'm telling you, that's going to be a big.
That's significant for him.
Yeah.
And I also think that the limitations of him as a perimeter player, right? I think that's fair. The conditioning questions are fair. And I say that as a guy that likes Clingan, right? Yeah. There's all sorts of things that make me say if they drafted Donovan Clingan at 7-ish, he's still a reserve. I think that makes all the sense in the world. And I agree with you completely on the malleability of this roster. And it's one of the reasons I would keep Luke Kennard. If you need defense, Imagine a Desmond Bain, Marcus Smart, Vince Williams Jr., Brandon Clark, Jaren Jackson Jr., 5. You're not scoring the basketball on that defensive 5. And then if you need an offensive alignment, Ja Morant, Luke Kennard, G.G. Jackson, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bain. Again, there's so much there's so many variables with this group. And you alluded to earlier, partner, the idea of guys understanding their role, knowing their spot. We'll talk more about that with Gigi here in a moment.
Yeah.
That's what has me most excited about next season is I think you've got a group of guys that buy into what they are and what they're going to be. Yeah. And that is very significant because it allows for you to have that flexibility. There might be games where you don't see a ton of Brandon Clark. Not because he's bad at basketball all of a sudden, but because the matchup doesn't dictate it. There might be games where Donovan Clingan doesn't play at all, and I'm using him as an example. Andre Drummond, right? People love Andre Drummond. I'd be cool with Andre Drummond. That's fine. That would make total sense. But you would treat Drummond the same way you would treat Clingan in a lot of ways. I don't think Drummond needs to start. I think that you look at what this team can do, and there's so much room for maneuvering, and there's so much opportunity I've talked about this before. It's like a baseball throwing a change or a baseball pitcher throwing a changeup, right? You pound with the fastball, and then here comes the change, right? You can't predict what's coming at you. And I think that is something that Taylor Jenkins in his scheme at times and the Grizzlies as a whole have lacked that ability to use that depth in that way to be more unpredictable. I have hope that is something they are more interested in because of the way they deployed their roster, the way they built their depth, using this gap year in such a fashion. Let Damichael know if you agree with us in terms of how that all can kind of play out and shake out here in the next couple of months as Memphis pursues that big. But before we leave on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, we do want to talk about G.G. Jackson, another chance for him to shine. He did a phenomenal job in his first breakdown day. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, friendly reminder that the NFL draft is approaching and Locked On's NFL mock draft will be live on April 17th at 7 p.m., streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, as well as on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. The Ultimate 6-episode series will be there for you to hear who Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, live reactions from local college football experts, even the fantasy football angle itself. Again, April 17th, 7 p.m., Locked On NFL Mock Draft streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and you can also check it out on the Amazon Fire TV free channels app. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Again, I feel like we've all been there, right? Either as a player, as a fan. Halftime, the scoreboard's not looking good. You feel low, not sure your team can pull out a win, but you got to dig deep. You got to lift your head up and say to yourself, it's time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. Okay, maybe not that far, but the smash hit Monopoly game or mobile game, Monopoly Go, lets you do just that with your friends, competing to get the most riches in the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. You can play countless dynamic Monopoly boards, charge other players rent for your iconic properties, and so much more. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb up the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, download Monopoly Go now on the App Store for free or on Google Play. Go check it out. It's a good time. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out with some more G.G. Jackson goodness. I know that's what everybody wants to see. It's Grizzlies Twitter's or Grizzlies social media's favorite player, G.G. Jackson, coming up next. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Again, Damichael did a phenomenal job covering Breakdown Day. We'll talk more about Breakdown Day on tomorrow's show. We talked a lot about Memphis' title chances, according to Ja Morant. Zach Kleiman stating the obvious that a big is needed. But, partner, I thought the star of Breakdown Day Media Day was G.G. Jackson. And he's just so genuine in his youth. He's genuine in, how excited he was, whether it's being interviewed by Shaq earlier in the season, or I believe he had an anecdote about Chris Middleton and how he's excited that he has like good NBA players' numbers in his phone now. Whatever the case might be, he's so likable in that way. It makes you wonder what in the world people saw that made him fall to the second round of last year's draft. Thank goodness he did, right? Everybody else's loss is Memphis's gain. But this guy's probably going to be all rookie team, right? If he had been with the Grizzlies the entire time, maybe he's first team all rookie. He'll probably be second team. I think that's a realistic expectation at this point. And he was the star of the show for me. You mentioned it earlier in the program. He is very self-aware. He understands that his usage is going to go down. He understands that his role is going to adjust as the Grizzlies get healthy. And he doesn't look at that and say, oh man, I'm going to be so unhappy that I'm not going to be the star anymore. He looks at it and says, okay, how do I mold my game to them so that we start winning? Because he can go drop 40 points for anybody and lose, right? But he wants to win, and he wants to be a part of that winning formula in Memphis. And again, I came out of breakdown day more excited than I thought I would be. And G.G. Jackson's a major reason why, not because he scored 44 points in his season finale, but because he understands that in order for him to continue to have success in the team aspect in Memphis, he's going to have to make some changes to his game in a positive way.
Yeah, that's the huge storyline. And the first step is understanding it. You have to understand that, hey, when Ja Morant and Desmond Bane are on the floor, no more of those pull-up transition three-pointers. Right now, it's funny. I was talking to somebody about this. Like, we don't care right now when, with all due respect to some of the other guys, when they're on the floor and G.G. Jackson's pulling up with 17 seconds on the shot clock and shooting three-pointers, it's like, get your shots up, G.G. Like, we like the confidence. But when Ja Morant and Desmond Bane are on the floor and you're down 2 in the middle of the third quarter, people are going to be pulling their hair out. G.G., what are you doing? Like, that's going to be the feeling. But right now it's cool. So, again, you're right. And I think the first step is understanding, hey, Ja Morant and Desmond Bane are beside me, and Jaren Jackson Jr. is on the court as well. And he understands that. So with that being the case, I see that it shouldn't be a tough adjustment for him playing in that role with those kinds of guys. Now, I'm sure there will be an adjustment overall. He likes to have the ball in his hands. He's very good with the ball in his hands. And his spot-up three-point shooting was decently well this season, but I'm not ready to rely on that area of his game. I like him with the ball in his hands and whatnot, and his ability to play off the ball. So, all in all, I think we learned a lot about GG this season, and that was another example of the media star that he's going to become as well too. But we also learned that he's going to be in the summer league. Taylor Jenkins kind of confirmed it, and Gigi talked about it as well. But he's going to be on the roster of summer league. So now, Joe, I think we officially have the summer league Grizzlies dream team assembled with Scottie Pippen Jr., Trey Jemison, G.G. Jackson, and potential first-round pick to lead the way.
They definitely need to make that bet as soon as it goes live. If you are a big fan of FanDuel, if you use that app for the reason it exists, you probably should go bet as a degenerate in April or whenever that would go live on the Memphis Grizzlies to win Summer League. Is there a future Summer League? Probably not. I will get out of here on this, partner, for this episode. Watching Gigi, seeing how polished he is, all the records he broke this year, all the amazing things. I try to temper my expectations because so often the name that he gets mentioned with is LeBron James, right? And nobody's comparing him to LeBron James. I want to stress that, right? Like Wembanyama gets compared to LeBron and his rookie numbers are more impressive than LeBron's. And there's reasons for that. Wembanyama played professionally. He's also 7'5" and has guard skills. So Wembanyama maybe getting that comp makes more sense.
Yeah.
GG, it feels like a stretch, and I don't want to get that excited.
It's more of the stats,
right?
Because of his age. He's the youngest since LeBron to do this,
right?
The youngest since LeBron to do that. So,
do you get the sense from him? And I think I already know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. Again, you listen to him talk, you see how he responds to the way that he's been getting this treatment. Is that something that's going to get to his head? He seems like somebody that's pretty level-headed. Again, I don't know why he fell down the draft the way he did. There must have been something that scared people off, but it looks like it was overreacted to. I think that he's going to do the things that he said. His actions so far have been that of a professional, except for the time I think he got suspended for a game. But he learned from it, right? I don't think it happened again since that moment. How do you perceive that level of success translating not just into next year, but technically he's under contract with the Grizzlies over the next few years? Do you see him on that upward trajectory? Is it realistic to keep him in a certain bubble below that? What is realistic to expect for him entering into Summer League here in a couple of months?
It's going to be different going forward because now those guys who are on the bench, who would say something when you come out of the game and things like that, you're going to be on the floor with them. And Ja's going to be marking out directions with you on the floor, Derrick Rose and Marcus Smart and all these. So it's going to be a different perspective. And you wonder how he's going to take that. Every guy on the team that I talked to about GG, they literally everyone, like if you ask the players about GG, 9 times if you ask 10 players, 9 of them are going to say how much he asks questions. He likes to listen. Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, they all say it. Like Des was talking about it, after the exit interview, just like, man, GG's a sponge, like he's soaking up the knowledge. Taylor Jenkins talks about it. So if he keeps that same mentality, he'll be fine. And I think, those guys will go out there. They'll be out there in Vegas. If the Grizzlies go to Utah, they'll be out there as well. They'll be supporting them and whatnot. And it's going to be this is a big period for GG Jackson, I think, coming up. I feel like when we saw it with Desmond Bane as a rookie, when he got that chance to go to Summer League and they put the ball in his hands and said, hey, we want you to work on this part of your game. They did the same thing with Zaire Williams. The results weren't the same, but, the goal was to make him a better player on the ball. And I think it's going to be similar with GG Jackson, probably a little bit different because he's going to be playing with Scottie Pippen Jr. But he's gonna have the ball in his hands a lot, and he's going to have that opportunity to really showcase that part of his game. But all in all, again, he's very coachable. All the guys talk about how he listens, and he keeps that, and he'll be fine.
I think so too. The ball will be in Scottie Pippen Jr.'s hands until he passes it to GG, right?
Yeah, it's over after that.
Outside of whatever Memphis does with the lottery pick, and again, maybe they trade it and it's not a thing. Maybe they view GG as their lottery pick because, again, he's 19 years old. Whatever the case might be, I think it's going to be a pretty significant summer for GG. I'm with you on that for sure. I'm excited to watch it unfold. He has really grown by leaps and bounds in so many ways. It's a lot of fun. And you can tell he's appreciative of it, and that's one of the best parts. Coming up on our next episode on Wednesday, we're going to continue our breakdown day conversations. Again, there are some things that Damichael and I noticed from Brandon Clark, the mention of Luke Kennard without the follow-up. I think that there were some questions that were kind of left unanswered that lead to some interesting offseason storylines, partner.
Oh, yeah, definitely so. And, you mentioned them, Brandon Clark, Luke Kennard, all big parts of what potentially could be a very interesting Grizzlies offseason.
Desmond Bane wanted to be better at one-on-one. Maybe he got jealous of watching Jaren display his isolation game. Lots of stuff to discuss on our Wednesday show and even beyond that. So we will be taking a day or two break, but not quite yet. There will be a Wednesday episode of Locked On Grizzlies, and I'm looking forward to being back with Damichael for it. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Continue to stay locked in, everybody. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing on YouTube, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts. Be an everydayer. Check us out every time an episode drops. If this is your first time coming by, thank you. We hope that you'll stick around. Leave us a note in the comments. Let us know how we're doing. Again, like, comment, rate, review, and most importantly, subscribe to Locked On Grizzlies. We'll be back tomorrow. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On NBA, all the great content that we put out as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And make sure you're back here tomorrow for Locked On Grizzlies. For Damichael, again, I'm Joe. Thank you so much for making us part of your NBA content consumption, and we'll catch you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.